It's time for Chasing the Word on Compassion Radio.
Welcome back to Compassion Radio and Chasing the Word, the way that we start our week right in the Word and just encouraging each other with those words.
And thank you for those kind words, honey. We have been working our way through the book of John for this last series. Middle of chapter 11 now. Powerful chapter. We think we know the story, but the thing about spending time in the Word together is that you have new eyes every time you look at it because someone else is there with you to help see things. And I believe that's part of the Holy Spirit's work. That's why we do it together on our Compassion Radio program to start our weeks together.
Yeah. Well, last week we ended up with Martha having a conversation with Jesus after Jesus comes to Bethany, knowing full well that Lazarus has been dead 4 days.
And to call it a conversation is a little bit understating it. It is a head-on collision of emotion and desperation,
grief,
love, and not a little bit of anger. There's a lot of frustration here, and Jesus walks into it knowing full well, I think, that he's in some ways created some of this frustration. He didn't show up, quote, in time to do the thing everybody was expecting him to do, which was to rush to their side and to take care of business and perform a miracle for them. He didn't do it.
Right.
And
not the way they wanted him to.
And that was the frustrating thing. I think in our lives in general, it seemed like that a lot. We have this notion in our minds of what should happen now to make it really, truly a God thing. And then things don't come to pass the way we planned. People die on us, or something happens that is completely out of our control that we're angry about. I mean, the whole world's been going through that the past couple of years with COVID. And here is Jesus facing the ultimate test of faith. Can you believe even when you don't get what you want and you lose something desperately dear to you? That's the situation we're sitting in. And that's what most of this chapter is about, is the preparation for the thing they can't imagine is going to happen.
What I love about this so much is seeing how they interacted with Jesus on such a personal and real level and how he responds to them on such a personal level. He doesn't necessarily scold them for the way they're grieving. And I think this is a good lesson for us. We grieve individually. And how we grieve is ours. It doesn't belong to anyone else. And it's one of the things that I have learned very deeply over the last year and a half since losing my mother. Now, losing my father was difficult 20-something years ago, and my brother almost 10 years ago. But I grieve them all differently. And I think that's okay because the relationship that I had with each of them was a little different.
And it's even more about the relationship than just the circumstances.
Exactly. And I see Jesus allowing these people around him, especially Martha, and we'll see Mary soon, grieve in the way that suits them, the way that highlights their personalities in some ways.
And that reminds me of something really important here. When we talk about Jesus doing what he's about to do, this is theology. This is God expressing himself in ways that we can understand. Not the hows, not the methodologies, but we understand his heart. But this interaction with these people is, in fact, God showing up.
Right.
God did something extraordinary. So that is theology. But he's no ivory tower theologian. He doesn't send people out to go proclaim pithy things that end up on bumper stickers. He shows up. And the way he shows up is because he has a relationship or wants to build a relationship or to address a broken relationship. I think Jesus navigates his way through the world completely on the basis of relationships, which tells us this is the heart of God. He does not descend to earth to do something to those people or about those people. He comes to be with those people, his people.
Yeah.
And he owns them all.
Right. The side note for me is that Jesus gets to say these things in this scripture. He gets to say the hard things and to say, don't you believe in me? Don't you believe that I'm the resurrection? He gets to say them because he, in fact, is the resurrection and the life. He is those things. I'm not sure that we get to say those things to other people.
No, but I do think that they are questions he asks because he wants us to answer them. Those questions are being asked to Martha. There's going to be some place in our lives where we're going to face those questions ourselves, and we have to admit and acknowledge that those questions coming to our hearts are from God himself. He's asking us the same question today. When we face a Martha moment when she's lost her brother and she's done everything right, she's been faithful, she's been attentive. She's been worshipful. She's never been rebellious, that we can tell in the scriptures. And yet, in that moment where the crisis hits, she didn't get what she thought she deserved or what she thought even her good friend, this Rabbi Jesus, wanted for her. Mm-hmm. She didn't get it.
She gets a bad rap sometimes.
Sometimes. But we have to admit that we're a whole lot more like Martha in these situations than we are about anybody else.
Yeah.
So let's pick it up again where we had dropped off last week, which was at verse 27.
I'm going to continue in the Passion Translation. Then Martha replied, "Yes, Lord, I do believe. I've always believed that you are the Anointed One, the Son of God, who has come into the world for us." Then she left and hurried off to her sister, Mary, and called her aside from the mourners and whispered to her, "The Master is here, and he's asking for you." We don't hear that in Jesus asking for her. So I've always wondered what Martha's thinking here, but we'll continue. So when Mary heard this, she quickly went off to find him, for Jesus was lingering outside the village at the same spot where Martha had met him. Now when Mary's friends, who were comforting her, noticed how quickly she ran out of the house, they followed her, assuming that she was going to the tomb of her brother to mourn. When Mary finally found Jesus outside the village, she fell at his feet in tears and said, "Lord, if only you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus looked at Mary and saw her weeping at his feet, and all her friends who were grieving with her, he shuddered with emotion and was deeply moved with tenderness and compassion. He said to them, "Where did you bury him?" "Lord, come with us and we'll show you," they replied. Then tears streamed down Jesus' face. Seeing Jesus weep caused many of the mourners to say, "Look how much he loved Lazarus." Yet others said, "Isn't this the one who opens blind eyes? Why didn't he do something to keep Lazarus from dying?" Then Jesus, with intense emotions, came to the tomb, a cave with a stone placed over its entrance. Jesus told them, "Roll away the stone." But Martha said, "Lord, it's been 4 days since he died. By now his body is already decomposing." Jesus looked at her and said, "Didn't I tell you that if you will believe in me, you will see God unveil his power?" So they rolled away the heavy stone, and Jesus gazed into heaven and said, "Father, thank you that you have heard my prayer, for you listen to every word I speak. And now, so that these who stand here with me will believe that you have sent me to the earth as your messenger, I will use the power you have given me." Then with a loud voice, Jesus shouted with authority, "Lazarus, come out of the tomb!" Then in front of everyone, Lazarus, who had died 4 days earlier, slowly hobbled out. He still had grave clothes tightly wrapped around his hands and feet and covering his face. And Jesus said to them, "Unwrap him and let him loose." From that day forward, many of those who had come to visit Mary believed in Jesus, for they had seen with their own eyes this amazing miracle.
Few things stand out about this particular slice. One is Jesus waits outside, away from the house. Mm-hmm. He already knows these people. He's familiar. He's practically family. He might even be family, cousins of them. Mm-hmm. For some reason, he chose to stay away and send a message up there saying, "Are you ready for me?" I think he knows full well what he's walking into because of their expectations. Mm-hmm. They expected him to show up and he didn't. And he's never failed them before. Mm. That's going to take some sorting out. And if he just barges in there like he owns the place, expects to be listened to immediately, there's no humility in that. But everything about these kind of relationships, the more tender they get with Jesus, the more obvious they are that he loves somebody, the more respectful he gets of that relationship and the people at the other side of it.
Right. Yeah.
He doesn't barge in. And if there's anything I'm going to learn about how God approaches us at our rawest moments, is that he quietly waits by the door. Mm. There are those who say that when Jesus says, "Behold, I stand at the door and knock. Anyone who opens the door and welcomes me in, I will sit down with him and have dinner with him. We'll have fellowship." Mm-hmm. People say, well, he's banging loudly to get your attention. Other people said, no, it's just a gentle tap. Like he doesn't want to startle you. I don't know what the circumstances would require in different situations, but I think God is aware that how he approaches us and the timing of his approach to us, our ability to receive that approach is critical. Mm-hmm. And he knows the needs of these women. He knows the needs of that crowd. He knows the needs of humanity when he walks into this miracle situation. And as soon as Mary falls at his feet and just completely unwinds, I mean, the spool just... Right. The wire goes crazy. Yeah. She's finally letting loose all of that tension and all of that grief at once. That's got to move you.
Yeah.
And if you love that woman already and see her come apart because you had to do something that your father said to do, and you feel perhaps torn,
yeah.
Jesus responds with the most natural and truthful and honest way possible. He wept with her. Mm-hmm. Do we do that now? Or do we try to stuff Jesus stuff in people's faces when they're facing crises? I get really tired of those who hyper-spiritualize and try to sound more impressive or more King James-ish when they face crises than just being with people and feeling it and being willing to cry tears, not of pity, but of empathy, of involvement, of being willing to sit there as long as it takes.
Yeah, I think that's what I was talking about when I said earlier that Jesus gets to say these things because he is the eternal anointed one.
Yeah.
So he gets to say them, but he says them to us in a way that reminds us that we are his focus. And he sits with us in our grief, and he sits with us in our confusion and anger. Mm-hmm. And like you said, I love to think about Jesus in this way, and that he's not just like barging through the door, pushing things out of the way and saying, you know, Sandy, get up off that couch and get yourself in gear and act like you trust me. He never demands that of me.
Yeah.
He always tenderly sits with me until he knows my heart is ready. Then the questions can come. The wisdom comes.
The willingness of us to accept it, to listen. Even in our moment of crisis, if we are approached with love and with gentleness, we can possibly have ears open then to listen to what they have to say to us. Mm-hmm. And of course, the words Jesus says are critical here because they have authority. They're not just empathetic words. Mm-hmm. They're transforming words.
Yeah.
And what he says is going to happen. He is willing to approach us to make it possible for us to hear him. Mm-hmm. I think it's a beautiful promise. Now, if you were in Jesus' shoes, which all the disciples around him were, wanting to get on to Bethany to solve this problem because they all were friends with Mary and Martha and Lazarus too, they're being held back and they don't get it. And then Jesus finally moves. Everybody is thinking constantly about Lazarus and the situation they're walking into and the dangers from the priests and the authorities in Jerusalem that might be lurking about, ready to snatch them away. Jesus himself has been spending days thinking about this. He didn't ignore it. It wasn't out of his mind.
Yeah.
I think it's perfectly reasonable to think by the time he got there, he had been thinking and praying through this thing the entire journey.
Yeah.
Which also means, because we've seen him pray before, when he prays, things happen. Mm-hmm. The fears of those around the tomb about Lazarus' corruption, about actually beginning to rot, are grounded in reality.
For sure, yeah.
I've got to think there's something about the prayers of Jesus all along the way that literally preserved his body so that he could reintegrate with his soul. I believe that that was part of the power of the prayer of his investment in this event. We know that Jesus did not see corruption in the grave, and the prophecies from David say that. I believe that Jesus is buoying up even the matter that made up Lazarus
That's interesting.
while he was on this earth. And because of that, you don't have to worry about corruption. If Jesus is there, even in our death, there's not corruption or death or rot. He preserves us. And I do think there's a very deep spiritual analogy in that about how we pass through the veil and into, as we would say, the bosom of Christ. Going to him, we say goodbye to our body for now, but there's something way beyond just the matter that we're involved with here that is being sustained and being resurrected and being created anew that we have hope for as believers. That same kind of power is going to be present in the flesh. How could it not be when Jesus is around?
The Apostle Paul talks about being raised incorruptible. This goes hand in hand with what's happening right here with Lazarus. He is being held in a space that we're not familiar with.
Right.
And as Jesus approaches this scene and this spot where Lazarus is buried, he begins to shudder with emotion, the scripture says. And he knows what he's going to do, and yet he still feels the deep connection with these people, the deep love and compassion and empathy for this group of people. I love that about Jesus.
Yeah.
I love that he knows all of the possible outcomes, and yet he still sits with us in that. And I think even though we don't know those outcomes, it's still important for us to be able to just sit with a person in their grief, in their sorrow, and let them feel it and not try to smooth it over. You know, I mean, sure, it's hard when when your children are crying and they're sad, or when you have a friend who's lost a loved one and they're just devastated and grieving. You want to make them feel better, and you want to take it all away, but I don't know that that's really the best thing to do.
We say that grieving is the only way to heal grief.
Yeah.
The God that created Jeremiah and told him to save up every one of his tears in the bottle, and there were hundreds of bottles he stored in caves because of all the weeping he did on behalf of his people. I believe that act of worship and obedience to God was God's way of preserving those tears for the time he had to pour them out on behalf of us in the first person. There's a spirit of Jeremiah here, of weeping for that which cannot be regained again, but then transforming it into something that is now going to become possible, even when it was impossible. God is the God of making possible that which is not. So Jesus comes and he reverses in some ways the trauma of Jeremiah and the people being oppressed and under the thumb of death. That change, that reversing of all things that seem about corruption, about the downward spiral of humanity and creation, he's kicking it into reverse gear here. And that's what I think is so beautiful about it. For 78 years now, we've depended on the faithful encouragement of friends just like you to bring this unique radio and media ministry to the air each day. You can drop us a line, ask a question, submit a prayer request, or download a free Bible study guide in just the same way. It all happens at compassionradio.com. This dynamic gospel is available to you in a handy paperback edition, and I'd love to send you one when you send your gift and ask for it. Remember, this is a 100% listener-supported ministry. If you've never supported us before, would you consider doing so this month? I know many of you can and want to give more, so I'll not be shy in asking for that support. Thank you for seriously considering this request and challenge. Our toll-free order line is 1-800-868-2478. That's 1-800-868-2478. If you need to call early or late, that's okay. Just make sure to leave your name and phone number, and we'll get back to you immediately when the doors open each business day. You can also give anytime online at compassionradio.com. And if you prefer to put a stamp on it, you can always find us at Compassion Radio, P.O. Box 2770, Orange, California, 92859. God bless you as you stretch your faith this year of 2021. I hope we can be a real encouragement and challenge to you for many, many years to come. And make sure to ask for your own copy of The Dynamic Gospel when you contact us today.
Honey, go ahead and read from the Dynamic Gospel now.
Okay. Again, from verse 27 on of chapter 11, the book of John. Martha breathed deep and said slowly, "Yes, yes, I do, Lord. You rule all of this. I believed in you from the beginning. I believe in you now. You are the one God sent, the only one he will send." Having made this confession, Martha withdrew quietly and went to her sister, saying, "The Master has arrived and would like to see you." Upon hearing the news, Mary rushed just as fast as Martha had to Jesus. This all happened at the city gates. Jesus hadn't even made it into town yet. Seeing Mary's outpouring of emotion and hasty departure, all of the official mourners in her house rose to follow, thinking she was rushing back to the grave of her brother to resume the traditional lament. Instead, she ran straight to Jesus and threw herself at his feet, calling out the same complaint as her sister. "My brother would not have died if you had arrived in time." When Jesus saw all the outpouring of genuine agony, echoed by all the traditional mourners, it truly touched Jesus' heart. He wept right along with them. When Jesus could speak again, he asked, "Where's the tomb?" "We'll show you," they said, leading the way. Jesus wept the whole way. The other mourners could see it was no act. This Jesus really felt deeply for their friend. "If only he had been here earlier," they lamented. "Maybe he could have saved Lazarus. He's a healer of the blind, after all." By the time they all reached the tomb, Jesus was sobbing. He approached the stone that sealed the mouth of the cave. Jesus said to the crowd, "Move the stone immediately." They were all shocked. Martha, being practical, said quietly, "Lord, he's been in the tomb 4 days. I don't think we could bear the smell." Jesus looked straight at her, all passion and fire. "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see God's glory with your own eyes?" So they did as Jesus demanded, pushing the stone aside. Jesus raised his face to heaven and prayed out loud, "Father, thank you that you hear me. I know you always have and always will listen when I call, but I'll say this out loud for the benefit of those assembled so they'll understand that you sent me." Having prayed, Jesus faced the tomb and practically screamed, "Lazarus, come out of there!" And out he came. Still bound in the wrappings of death stood the one they never thought they'd see again. "Cut him loose," Jesus called. "Get him away from this place of death." The official mourners and religious types had no idea this was coming. They saw what Jesus did with their own eyes. Many began to believe in their own hearts.
I never get over this scene in my head of Lazarus coming out of the tomb. I just see this mummy guy kind of walking out.
Like an old movie.
Right. And he's just, stumbling around and probably thinking, what is happening? I was just here and now I'm there and, what's going on? And there's a song that you and I love so much by a group called First Call called Lazarus Unwound. And I feel like that sometimes. I feel like that you're just so wound up with things, and all of them were bound. It wasn't just Lazarus in the tomb that was bound. Yeah. Like you said earlier, their emotions had wound and bound them up so much. And now, in the words of Jesus, says, cut him loose, unwind him, get that stuff off of him and free him. And he did that for all of them. In this scripture, he tells us, I'm going to unwrap you. I'm going to loose you from those chains, from those grave clothes that are holding you back from really living. And this is such a beautiful picture of that.
And to think in some ways, Lazarus had never really lived until now.
Yeah.
He knows from the far side of the grave that Jesus is the voice, the one calling him across time and space and eternity to come to him.
Yeah.
Of course he's going to come back this direction when Jesus himself calls out with a loud voice. That is the voice that resonates in the soul of man when you hear it. You know that this is the voice of God calling you to himself. And the sound of Jesus' voice does that. If there's any lesson to take away from all this, it's simply this for me. Jesus is still calling to us the same way he's calling to Lazarus. Are we going to listen and hear that voice and go toward him, no matter where he seems to be, in places that we don't expect him to be? If we go there, we'll be alive. If we stay in our grave, in our clothes, and we really don't want to hear that voice, we'll always remain dead. Paul talks about it as being kind of twice dead, like doubly baked. Yeah. For all eternity, separated from God, that is the second death. And I don't want anybody to be in that place, of course. But we have to realize that Jesus gets to call to us and call of us to come where he is. Even though he's gone all the way this distance, he chooses not to go all the way to the center of our souls. He lets us choose. That's one of the things I think is marvelous and mysterious and horrifying about our faith, is that there's still something in there that requires us to get involved. And to make that choice to say, I choose life because God is calling me to life, is something miraculous and marvelous partnership that we have with God himself. Yeah. And Lazarus chose this.
Well, there is so much in this chapter that we could spend weeks and weeks going through this chapter. So I hope you'll join us next week when we jump back into John chapter 11, and hopefully we'll finish it up next week. But there is so much more to talk about in this chapter. Thanks for joining us today.
Bright, new, clear, blue morning. What a crazy sight to see. Wakes up tripping over his grave clothes. Boy, that sure sounds a lot like me. Lazarus unwind. What a day for a true believer. Lazarus unwind. Follow the voice of my salvation. I'm still tied up head to toe. God send me brothers and sisters to loose me and let me go like Lazarus unwind. For a true believer, Lazarus unwind. So I'm alive again. I'm gonna be set free with a little help from my friend. I'm gonna walk, I'm gonna run, I'm gonna see. I'm gonna see, yes, I'm gonna see like Lazarus unwind. For a true believer, Lazarus unwind. Unwind. For a true Lazarus, I'm gonna be like Lazarus, unwound.
God bless you as you stretch your faith this year of 2021. I hope we can be a real encouragement and challenge to you for many, many years to come. And make sure to ask for your own copy of The Dynamic Gospel when you contact us today. Remember, none of this is possible without you. If you believe hearing the good news from the front lines of faith builds your faith, then let us know today. Just call us at 1-800-868-2478. Write us at Compassion Radio, P.O. Box 2770, Orange, California, 92859, or make your gift through our website, compassionradio.com. We need you, friend, so contact us today.